My sister always wanted to be a mother, then hated her daughter the moment she was born. I nuked both our families when I discovered why. My whole family, me included, thought it was just because Jenny was a girl. My sister Riri always said she hated girls and only liked boys. Friends, partners, co-workers, she only ever hung out with guys. When Riri got pregnant the first time, she threw a huge gender reveal party, and everything was covered in blue because she was so sure it was a boy. I remember her face just falling when pink powder filled the air. She forced a smile, but I saw her shoulders slump. The rest of her pregnancy, she shared articles about how girls are too dramatic and posted in online groups for boy moms about hoping for a son next time. After Jenny was born, things got weird. Riri would only dress her in brown or white clothes. She called her the child instead of her name. At family get-togethers, she'd complain that Jenny was too emotional and too needy. The poor kid was only 2 years old. She would tell anyone who would listen that she didn't want her. Meanwhile, my husband Joseph and I had been trying for a baby for 7 years. We'd been through everything. The shots, the procedures, the awful letdowns. I remember asking Riri if she'd consider letting us adopt Jenny, since she so clearly didn't want her. She got this crazy look in her eye and told me she'd rather sell Jenny than give her to us. I can't believe I thought she was just exaggerating. When Riri announced her second pregnancy last year, she was dead set on it being a boy. She announced that if it was a girl, she'd get in termination of pregnancy because she wasn't having another mistake. During the pregnancy, she tried every old wives' tale. She used Chinese gender charts, took special oils, and even looked into costly gender selection treatments. We all thought she was crazy, until we found out she was actually having a boy. She went insane with joy. I remember at the gender reveal, when the blue smoke finally came, she dropped to her knees and just sobbed with happiness. Jenny, who was just a toddler, waddled over to hug her. Riri literally pushed her away, and the little girl stumbled and scraped her knee on a metal chair. It was awful to watch. We didn't interact much with Riri for the rest of the pregnancy, and even after she gave birth, the family kept its distance, mainly since she'd gone to another country to have the baby, claiming it was cheaper. Then, about 2 months after her son Robert was born, we all got on a family video call. At first it was nice. Robert was sleeping, and Riri was showing him off in his little mama's boy outfit. That's when my aunt asked to see Jenny. Riri's eyes went wide. She just looked down and quietly said Jenny wasn't with her. My aunt pushed her to explain. That's when Riri admitted she put Jenny up for adoption in December, while she was 6 months pregnant. She said she couldn't handle 2 kids and that giving her away before Christmas saved money on presents, which she needed for her trip. Everyone on the call was shocked. Not even 30 seconds later, my grandma started clutching her chest. Her breathing got shallow and she kept gasping Jenny's name. I was screaming at Riri that Joseph and I would have taken Jenny. I noticed he looked super uneasy the second I said that. The call fell apart. Riri disconnected while my grandma had to be rushed to the hospital. When I got home that night after making sure my grandma was okay, Joseph was acting very strange. First, I found him in our bedroom deleting photos from his phone. They were all from 4 years ago. The photos seemed random, and some looked like black and white ultrasound pictures. The timeline matched up to when I had my miscarriage, so I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, but I had to ask. I asked what he was deleting, and he just stood up and went to the bathroom to keep doing it. When he came back out, I asked what was going on, and he just snapped. He told me I was being paranoid and needed to let it go. He said what happened with Jenny was Riri's business and we shouldn't get into it. This was strange. I hadn't even mentioned Jenny. The next day, I hired a private investigator. I told him to find out where Jenny was, who her father was, and to get me anything I could use to build a case. The PI worked fast. Within 2 weeks, he had hotel records, credit card receipts, and recovered text messages. The timeline was damning. 4 years ago, right after my miscarriage when I was in the hospital, Riri had comforted Joseph. Jenny was born exactly 9 months later. The PI even managed to get Jenny's DNA from a toothbrush she used at our house. It was a match for Joseph. I broke down when I found out. It took everything I had not to just scream and blow up our lives, but I didn't. I stayed calm. And a week later, I found myself sitting in my car outside our home, holding the envelope with all the proof. My husband was due home in an hour, and my sister was coming over to catch up at that exact same time. I watched them both pull into the parking lot at the same time. Caleb's silver Honda parked next to Riri's red SUV. They got out and exchanged a quick glance before walking toward the building entrance, keeping a careful distance between them. My hands shook as I gripped the envelope tighter. I waited 5 minutes before following them inside. The elevator ride felt endless. When I reached our apartment door, I heard their voices inside, casual and relaxed. My key turned in the lock. They both looked up when I entered. Caleb sat on the couch scrolling through his phone while Riri stood by the kitchen counter with a glass of water. The normalcy of it made my stomach turn. "Hey babe," Caleb said without looking up. "Riri just got here." I set the envelope on the coffee table. "We need to talk. All 3 of us." Riri rolled her eyes. "If this is about Jenny again, I told you it's done. The adoption is final." I opened the envelope and spread the contents across the table. Hotel receipts, phone records, the DNA test results. Caleb's face went white as he recognized the papers. "What is this?" His voice cracked. "You know exactly what it is." I kept my voice steady. 4 years ago, while I was in the hospital after losing our baby, you were with my sister. Riri laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh my god, you hired someone to dig into this? That's pathetic." "Is it pathetic that Jenny is Caleb's daughter?" I held up the DNA results. "Is it pathetic that you gave away his child without telling him?" Caleb stood up, his phone clattering to the floor. "This is fake. You're making this up because you're jealous that Riri had kids and you couldn't." I pulled out my phone and hit play on the recording the PI had retrieved. Caleb's voice filled the room, talking to Riri about keeping their secret, about how I could never know about Jenny's real father. Riri's laughter died. She set down her water glass hard enough to crack it. "You recorded us?" "The PI did. From your own security system, Riri. The one you installed after Liam was born." I gathered the papers back into neat piles. "I've already filed for divorce, Caleb. Our joint accounts are frozen. You'll be getting papers tomorrow." Caleb lunged for the documents, but I pulled them back. "Half our money is gone. You can't do this." "Actually, I can. Infidelity tends to affect asset division." I turned to Riri. "Did Caleb ever give you money for Jenny? Child support?" Riri's face twisted. "He said he couldn't without you finding out. He promised once you two divorced naturally he'd help, but then you kept trying for a baby." They turned on each other instantly. Caleb accused Riri of trafficking trapping him. Riri screamed about raising his child alone for years. I stepped back as they shouted, their conspiracy crumbling into mutual blame. The apartment door burst open. My grandmother walked in, supported by my aunt and uncle. Despite her recent hospital stay, her eyes blazed with determination. Enough! Grandmother's voice cut through their arguing. Riri, we need to talk about this adoption. Riri crossed her arms. It's done. Closed adoption. No contact. I made sure of it. My aunt stepped forward. The Sunshine Private Adoption Agency, right? I recognize the name from the papers you signed. I've worked with them before in family court. Riri's smugness faltered. So, they're known for their 6-month reversal window. Biological parents can reclaim children if both parents didn't consent. My aunt looked at Caleb. Did you sign anything? Caleb shook his head slowly. I didn't even know she was pregnant until after Jenny was born. Riri said it was from a one-night stand. I chose a family in Oregon specifically so you couldn't find her. Riri spat at me. They're probably already attached to her. I pulled out another document. Actually, they've been trying to contact you. Apparently, you didn't disclose Jenny's behavioral issues, the ones you complained about constantly. Riri grabbed for her phone. I'll call them right now and tell them to keep her. They're already driving her back, I said quietly. They contacted the agency 2 weeks ago about returning her. My lawyer has been in communication with them. Grandmother moved closer to Riri. You have 2 choices. Cooperate with getting Jenny back to this family, or I'll remove you from my will entirely. Liam too. Riri's face went red. You can't threaten me with money. I just did. Grandmother's voice was steel. That child deserves better than being thrown away because you only wanted boys. Riri turned to Caleb, grabbing his arm. We can fight this together. Get custody of our daughter. Caleb jerked away. Our daughter? You gave away our daughter without telling me. You let me think she was someone else's. You didn't want her either. You were relieved when I said I was handling it. Riri's voice rose to a shriek. My aunt held up her phone. I'm recording this conversation, by the way. Your admission that you gave away Jenny specifically to hurt your sister will be very interesting in family court. Riri made a break for the door but found my uncle blocking her path. My truck's blocking your car. You're not going anywhere until we sort this out. Riri's phone rang. The adoption agency's number flashed on the screen. She answered on speaker, trying to maintain control. Ms. Riri, the adoptive family has encountered an emergency and is returning early. They'll be in town tonight. Where should they bring Jenny? My house, Riri said quickly. Actually, my lawyer's voice came through the phone. He'd been conferenced in. We've arranged for Jenny to be brought to her great-grandmother's house. All parties have agreed this is the safest neutral location. Riri threw her phone against the wall. It shattered into pieces. Caleb backed away from her as she turned her rage on everyone in the room. You planned this. All of you, she pointed at me. You'll never be her mother. Never. But neither will you, I said quietly. You made that choice when you gave her away to hurt me. My aunt produced a folder. Caleb, these are parental rights documents. If you sign them, you can avoid prosecution for abandonment and back child support. Caleb's hands shook as he took the papers. Prosecution? You knew about Jenny for years and provided no support, my aunt explained. Riri's messages prove you knew. He signed without reading, desperate to save himself. Riri watched in horror as her last ally crumbled. This isn't over, Riri hissed. I'll get her back. She's mine. Legally, yes, my aunt agreed. But family court will be very interested in your social media history. All those posts about not wanting a daughter. The adoption motivated by spite. Your statement that you'd rather sell her than give her to family. We left the apartment in separate cars, a convoy heading to my grandmother's house. Riri tried to follow but got pulled over for erratic driving. By the time she arrived, the adoptive family's car was already in the driveway. I stood on the porch as they brought Jenny out. She looked smaller than I remembered, wearing a pink coat I'd never seen. Her hair was longer, pulled back in pigtails. She clutched a stuffed elephant. The adoptive mother looked exhausted. She's been asking for someone named Auntie for weeks, crying every night. My heart broke. Jenny looked around at all the faces, confused and scared. When Riri pushed through the group, Jenny backed away, hiding behind the adoptive father. I don't know you, Jenny whispered. Riri dropped to her knees. I'm your mommy, baby. Remember? But Jenny shook her head, pressing closer to the strangers who'd cared for her these past months. She spotted me, and her face lit up with recognition. Auntie, she ran to me, wrapping her small arms around my legs. Where mommy go? I knelt down to her level. I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe now. Riri's scream of rage sent Jenny into tears. The scene dissolved into chaos as my grandmother ushered everyone inside. Lawyers were called, and emergency custody papers were prepared. The battle for Jenny was just beginning, but for the first time in years, I had hope. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. Those 72 hours became a battlefield of legal maneuvering and family warfare that tested every ounce of strength I had left. The morning after Jenny arrived at my grandmother's house, Riri showed up at 6 a.m., pounding on the door and demanding her daughter. My uncle had stayed overnight specifically to prevent this. He opened the door just wide enough to inform her that any contact needed to go through lawyers. Riri tried to push past him, but he stood firm. She left screaming threats about kidnapping charges. My lawyer Nathaniel called an hour later with concerning news. Riri had hired her own attorney and was filing emergency motions claiming I'd orchestrated an illegal adoption reversal. The adoptive family from Oregon had provided sworn statements about Jenny's behavioral issues, constant nightmares, refusing to eat, crying for hours asking for Auntie. They'd documented everything, which worked in our favor, but Riri's lawyer was arguing they were exaggerating. That afternoon, Caleb showed up at my grandmother's house while I was there with Jenny. She was coloring quietly at the kitchen table, still withdrawn and confused. When she heard his voice, she looked up with recognition but didn't move from her chair. Caleb tried to approach her, but my grandmother stepped between them. You signed away your rights, she reminded him coldly. I was coerced, Caleb protested. I didn't know what I was signing. Nathaniel, who'd been reviewing documents in the living room, joined us. You signed in front of 3 witnesses after having the documents explained. That's hardly coercion. Caleb's face flushed. I want to see my daughter. The daughter you never acknowledged for 4 years? I kept my voice level, not wanting to upset Jenny. The one you let Riri give away without saying a word? He turned on me then, ugly and desperate. At least I didn't have to hire a PI to stalk my own family. How long were you planning this? How long were you waiting to steal her? Before I could respond, Jenny spoke up in a small voice. Why is everyone yelling? We all froze. I moved to her side, kneeling beside her chair. Sometimes grown-ups disagree, sweetheart. but you're safe. She looked at Caleb with those big eyes that were so much like his. Are you my daddy? The question hung in the air. Caleb's mouth opened and closed without sound. Finally, he turned and left without answering. Jenny watched him go, then returned to her coloring as if nothing had happened. The next morning brought a new crisis. Riri had gone to Jenny's old daycare and tried to obtain her records, claiming she needed them for medical reasons. The daycare director, thankfully, had heard about the situation through community gossip and refused. Riri caused such a scene that security was called. The incident was documented and forwarded to our legal team. My aunt spent hours preparing documentation for the hearing. She'd found Riri's social media history, years of posts in boy-mom groups, complaints about raising a daughter, even a deleted post from when Jenny was 18 months old, asking if anyone knew lawyers who handled rehoming adoptions. The evidence was damning, but Riri's lawyer would argue it was taken out of context. The financial pressure started immediately. Caleb had managed to access one of our investment accounts before the freeze went through, withdrawing $30,000. My lawyer filed immediate motions to recover it, but the damage was done. I had to borrow money from my grandmother to cover legal fees, something that made me sick with shame even though she insisted. 2 nights before the hearing, I was staying at my grandmother's house with Jenny when we heard glass breaking. Someone had thrown a rock through the living room window with a note attached. Stop this, or you'll regret it. We called the police, but without proof it was Riri or Caleb, they could only file a report. Jenny was terrified, clinging to me and asking if the bad people were coming back. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and drizzling. I dressed Jenny in the purple dress she'd picked out, her favorite color. She held my hand tightly as we walked into the courthouse, my entire family flanking us like protective walls. Riri arrived separately, dressed in a conservative suit I'd never seen her wear, clearly coached by her lawyer to appear maternal. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more like a conference room. Judge Harrison, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes, reviewed the stack of documents before her. Jenny sat on my lap, playing quietly with her stuffed elephant. Riri's lawyer went first, painting her as a struggling single mother who'd made a difficult choice for her daughter's benefit. He argued that the adoption had been legal and that my family was interfering with a closed proceeding. He presented Riri as a victim of postpartum depression who deserved a second chance. When Nathaniel stood to present our case, he laid out the evidence methodically. The social media posts, the recorded conversations about giving Jenny away to hurt me, the fact that Caleb hadn't been informed or consulted, the adoptive family's detailed documentation of Jenny's distress. He played a video the adoptive mother had taken of Jenny crying for Auntie until she made herself sick. Riri's composure cracked when they showed her Facebook posts. Those were jokes, she insisted, despite her lawyer's attempts to quiet her. Everyone vents about their kids online. Judge Harrison asked to speak with Jenny privately in her chambers, with only a child advocate present. Those 20 minutes felt like hours. When they returned, Jenny ran straight to me, burying her face in my shoulder. The judge's preliminary ruling was measured but clear. Given the circumstances of the adoption, the father's lack of consent, and the child's obvious distress, she was granting temporary emergency custody to me while a full investigation was conducted. Riri would have supervised visitation twice a week at a court-approved facility. The final custody hearing would be in 90 days. Riri exploded. She's not even her real mother. This is kidnapping. Ms. Riri, Judge Harrison's voice was ice. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. Outside the courthouse, Riri confronted us on the steps. You think you've won? I'll never stop fighting. Never. Then you'll keep losing, my grandmother said quietly, because you're fighting for pride, not love. The supervised visits started the following week. The first one was a disaster. Jenny cried the entire hour, begging to leave. Riri tried to bribe her with toys and candy, but nothing worked. The supervisor noted that Riri seemed more frustrated than concerned by her daughter's distress. Caleb, meanwhile, had started dating someone new, a woman from his office who'd been supporting him through his divorce. He posted photos of them on social media, calling her his fresh start. The speed of it was breathtaking, but it helped our case. What father moves on from his daughter so quickly? 3 weeks into the temporary custody, Jenny finally started to settle. She still had nightmares, still asked confused questions about why she had to visit that lady, but she was eating better and had started to smile again. I enrolled her in play therapy, driving her twice a week to help her process the trauma. The financial strain was crushing. Legal bills mounted daily. Caleb had cleared out more accounts than we'd initially realized, leaving me with massive debt from our failed fertility treatments. I sold my jewelry, my car, anything valuable. My family helped where they could, but everyone was stretched thin. Riri's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She showed up at Jenny's therapy appointment, demanding to sit in on the session. When refused, she sat in the parking lot for the entire hour, filming everyone who went in and out. Her lawyer dropped her after she accused him of conspiring with us. The second supervised visit was worse than the first. Riri brought Liam, trying to force a sibling bond, but Jenny was frightened of the baby's crying and hid under the table. When the supervisor tried to coax her out, Riri snapped that Jenny was being dramatic for attention. The visit ended early. My job suffered from all the court dates and emergency calls. My boss was understanding at first, but patience wore thin when I had to leave early for the 3rd time in a week because Jenny's daycare called about a meltdown. I was put on unpaid leave until things stabilized. 6 weeks before the final hearing, Riri's new lawyer filed a motion claiming I was alienating Jenny from her mother. They demanded increased visitation and a psychological evaluation of my fitness as a guardian. The evaluation would cost thousands I didn't have. My aunt found a child psychologist who agreed to evaluate Jenny pro bono after hearing our story. Dr. Sebastian spent 3 sessions with her, observing her play and gently asking questions. His report was thorough. Jenny showed clear signs of attachment disruption and trauma from the failed adoption. She viewed me as her primary attachment figure and showed fear responses when discussing Riri. The financial pressure finally broke me. I sat at my grandmother's kitchen table, surrounded by bills, sobbing. I'd dreamed of being a mother for so long, but not like this. Not drowning in debt while fighting my own sister for a child who woke up screaming every night. We'll figure it out, my grandmother said firmly, writing another check I knew she couldn't afford. Family takes care of family. Riri's 3rd supervised visit never happened. She showed up intoxicated, slurring her words and stumbling. The supervisor refused her entry and documented the incident. Her second lawyer dropped her the next day. With 4 weeks until the final final hearing, Caleb resurfaced with a new strategy. He filed a motion to revoke his signed rights, claiming he'd been emotionally manipulated. He wanted joint custody with me, cutting Riri out entirely. His filing included a declaration that Riri had been an unfit mother from the beginning. The betrayal was breathtaking, even for them. Riri went ballistic, sending Caleb hundreds of texts that his lawyer happily submitted as evidence of her instability. Their mutual destruction was complete, but it made everything more complicated. Now I was fighting two parents instead of one. Jenny's therapy sessions revealed heartbreaking details. She remembered being left with strangers, remembered crying for me and being told I didn't want her anymore. She'd believed she'd been bad, that everyone had thrown her away. The therapist testified that removing her from my care now would cause severe psychological damage. 2 weeks before the final hearing, I found Jenny cutting her own hair with safety scissors. When I asked why, she said she wanted to look like a boy so her first mommy would love her. I held her while she sobbed, my heart shattering into pieces I wasn't sure would ever fit back together. The final straw came when Riri posted a video online, hammered and ranting about the conspiracy to steal her daughter. She named names, including the judge and child services workers. Within hours, she was arrested for harassment and making threats against court officials. Her bail was set at $10,000 that no one would pay. I sat in my lawyer's office the day before the final hearing, exhausted beyond measure. Nathaniel reviewed our case one last time. The evidence was overwhelming. Riri's abandonment, her unfitness, the psychological damage to Jenny. Caleb's last-minute involvement looked like what it was, a desperate grab for control. But family court was unpredictable. Whatever happens tomorrow, Nathaniel said, you've given that little girl more love and stability in 3 months than she'd had in years. That matters. That night, as I tucked Jenny into bed at my grandmother's house, she looked up at me with those serious eyes. Auntie, will you be my mommy forever now? I smoothed her poorly cut hair, my throat tight with emotion. I'm going to try my very best, sweetheart. She nodded, satisfied, and curled into sleep. I sat beside her bed, watching her breathe, preparing for the battle that would determine both our futures. Tomorrow would bring either the family I'd always dreamed of, or the loss of another child I loved. There was no middle ground left. The final hearing arrived on a cold Thursday morning. I dressed Jenny in her favorite purple sweater and braided her choppy hair as best I could. She clutched my hand as we entered the courthouse, my family forming a protective circle around us. Riri arrived 20 minutes late, disheveled and alone. Her latest lawyer had withdrawn from the case after her arrest, leaving her to represent herself. She wore the same wrinkled suit from the preliminary hearing, coffee stains visible on the sleeve. Caleb sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with his new attorney, a sharp-dressed woman who'd apparently convinced him he still had parental rights despite signing them away. He avoided eye contact with everyone, focusing intently on his phone. Judge Harrison entered and immediately addressed the elephant in the room, Riri's arrest for threatening court officials. Riri tried to explain it away as stress, but the judge cut her off, noting it demonstrated poor judgment and impulse control. Nathaniel presented our case methodically, the psychological evaluations showing Jenny's attachment to me, the documented evidence of Riri giving her away out of spite, the supervised visit reports detailing Riri's inability to connect with her daughter. He submitted financial records showing I'd depleted my savings to provide for Jenny while Riri hadn't contributed a penny since the adoption. When Dr. Sebastian took the stand, he explained Jenny's trauma in clinical terms that made my chest ache. The abandonment had created deep insecurity. She believed she'd been thrown away for being wrong. Her attachment to me was her only stable relationship. Removing her now would cause irreparable psychological harm. Riri tried to cross-examine him, but her questions were rambling and accusatory. She claimed he'd been paid off, that the whole system was rigged against her. Judge Harrison had to warn her twice about courtroom behavior. Caleb's attorney argued her client had been manipulated into signing away his rights. She painted him as a victim of two scheming women, conveniently ignoring his affair and abandonment. Caleb testified that he wanted to be part of Jenny's life now that he understood she was his daughter. During a recess, I took Jenny to the bathroom. Riri cornered us in the hallway, dropping to her knees and grabbing Jenny's shoulders. Tell them you want to come home with mommy, she pleaded. Tell them you love me. Jenny pulled away, pressing against my legs. You're not my mommy. You gave me away. The court officer intervened, but the damage was done. Jenny spent the rest of the hearing in my lap, face buried in my shoulder, occasionally peeking out to make sure Riri wasn't approaching. When court resumed, Judge Harrison called Jenny to her chambers again. This time, Jenny went willingly, even giving the judge a small smile. They were gone for 30 minutes. When they returned, the judge's expression was grim. She began her ruling by acknowledging the biological relationship between Riri and Jenny. However, she continued, biology alone didn't make a parent. Riri had abandoned her child out of gender preference and spite. She'd shown no genuine interest in Jenny's well-being, only in winning a battle. Regarding Caleb, the judge noted his complete absence from Jenny's life for 4 years. His sudden interest coincided suspiciously with his divorce proceedings and appeared more about control than genuine paternal concern. His signed relinquishment of rights was legal and binding. The judge granted me full legal custody with no visitation rights for Riri pending completion of parenting classes, anger management, and psychological evaluation. Caleb's petition was denied entirely. The adoption process could begin immediately. Riri shot to her feet. You can't do this. She's mine. I gave birth to her. And then you gave her away, Judge Harrison replied. This court's primary concern is Jenny's well-being, not your regrets. Security moved toward Riri as she started advancing on the bench. She spun toward me instead, her face contorted with rage. This isn't over. I'll appeal. I'll fight this until you're bankrupt. Caleb slipped out during the commotion, not even glancing at the daughter he'd claimed to want. His attorney gathered her papers with obvious disgust. Outside the courthouse, my family surrounded us in a group hug. Jenny, still confused but sensing the celebration, managed a tiny smile. My grandmother kissed her forehead, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. That night, Riri appeared at my grandmother's house, Liam on her hip. She'd been drinking. She pounded on the door, demanding to see her daughter. When we didn't answer, she started screaming accusations at the windows. Neighbors called the police. I watched from an upstairs window as officers led her away, my grandmother holding Liam. Riri's parents would take custody of him within the week, deeming her unfit after multiple incidents. The adoption moved forward slowly. Background checks, home visits, court appearances. differences. Jenny started kindergarten at a new school where no one knew her history. She made friends with a girl named Sophie who also loved purple. 3 months into the process, Caleb sent a single email. I'm moving to Seattle for work. I won't contest the adoption. Tell her. Just take care of her. I didn't reply. Riri's appeals went nowhere. Her behavior at hearings kept deteriorating. She lost her job after missing too many shifts. Her parents reported she'd shown up hammered demanding money, claiming we'd stolen her life. The adoption finalized on a Tuesday. Jenny wore a new purple dress and held a stuffed elephant the judge gave her. When asked if she wanted to be my daughter, she nodded solemnly and said yes in a clear voice. That evening, as I tucked her into bed in what was now officially her room, she asked if Riri would try to take her away again. I smoothed her hair, still growing out unevenly, and promised I'd keep her safe. 6 months later, at a school event, I met David. His daughter was in Jenny's class. He was widowed, understood complicated family dynamics. We talked while our girls played on the swings. Riri sent a letter through her lawyer requesting a photo of Jenny. After discussion with Jenny's therapist, we decided against it. The therapist said Jenny was finally feeling secure. Contact now could undo months of progress. I returned to work part-time once Jenny adjusted to school. Money remained tight, but we managed. My grandmother helped with after-school care, their bond growing stronger daily. A year after the adoption, I ran into Caleb's mother at the grocery store. She hugged me, crying, saying she was grateful Jenny had me. She'd tried reaching out to Caleb about seeing his daughter, but he'd cut off contact. He says it's easier this way, she whispered. Riri stabilized eventually, according to my aunt. Got sober, found work, saw Liam on weekends under supervision. She never stopped claiming we'd stolen Jenny, but the fight had gone out of her. David and I took things slow. He understood Jenny came first. Their relationship developed naturally. He taught her to ride a bike, she showed him her drawings. When he proposed 2 years later, he asked Jenny's permission first. The wedding was small, family only. Jenny was my maid of honor, beaming in a purple dress she'd picked out herself. During the reception, she whispered, "Now I have a real daddy too." That night, after tucking her in, I stood in her doorway watching her sleep. The journey had been nothing like I'd imagined when Caleb and I struggled with infertility. But this child, who'd been thrown away by those who should have loved her most, had become my whole world. Jenny still had nightmares sometimes, still went to therapy monthly. The adoption hadn't erased her trauma, but she laughed now, really laughed. She knew she was loved, wanted, chosen. In the end, Riri had been right about one thing. I'd never be Jenny's real mother in the biological sense, but I was her mother in every way that mattered, and that was enough.